From US, we cross now live to London, where US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy are holding a joint news conference.
About exactly how the Ukrainians see their needs in this moment, toward what objectives, and what we can do to support those needs. So all I can tell you is we'll be listening intently to our Ukrainian partners. We'll both be reporting back to the Prime Minister, to President Biden in the coming days, and I fully anticipate this is something they'll take up when they meet on Friday.
Great, thank you. Daphne Saladakis from Reuters.
Thank you. Secretary Blinken, the U.S. has provided Ukraine with billions in military aid since 2022, but has limited the use of U.S. weapons to Ukrainian soil and defensive cross-border operations. Ukrainian President Zelensky has pushed back against allies who have supplied long-range weapons, but said Ukraine cannot use them deep inside Russia. So to follow up on my colleague's question, what will your message be to the Ukrainians about this during your visit this week? And more broadly, what do you see as the potential military impact of Iran supplying the ballistic missiles to Russia? Foreign Secretary, has Britain received sign-off to allow Ukraine to use the Storm Shadow missiles to strike targets inside Russia? And have you pushed for this? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm tempted to refer you to the previous answer. But look, again, I just want to emphasize this. As always, we're going to look and to listen and to make sure that we have our own best assessment of what's needed, what the objectives are that our Ukrainian partners have in the weeks and months ahead, and how we can best support them. And we will take that back and we'll both inform our bosses, the Prime Minister and the President. And again, I fully expect that will be a part of their conversation on Friday. A lot goes into each one of these decisions, but every step along the way, our purpose has been to make the Ukrainians as effective as possible in warding off the Russian aggression. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at where we are, these are difficult days given this aggression, but Ukraine continues to stand strong. And I believe that it's very much on a trajectory where it will be able to stand strongly on its own 2 feet, militarily, economically, democratically. It will be increasingly integrated with Europe. And Putin will continue to know a strategic failure in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians will know a strategic success in building a strong, vibrant country. But a lot more work has to go into making sure that happens, and we will be listening very intently on this and reporting back. On the Iranian weapons, as I said, this gives the Russians an additional capability and it gives them additional flexibility. They have ballistic missiles already, but the particular Iranian missiles that they're getting have a certain range. This means that Russia will be able to dedicate its own ballistic missiles to longer range targets, not use them on the shorter range because it will have these Iranian missiles that have about a 75-mile radius to them to do that. So it adds to their capacity and it fuels the war. Anyone who is providing assistance to Russia, whether it's direct lethal assistance like Iran or North Korea, whether it's assistance to their defense industrial base like China, is perpetuating the war, is fueling the conflict. And this is a threat not only to Ukraine and to the Ukrainian people, it's a threat to all of Europe. I think if you ask any of our European colleagues, they see Russia posing the greatest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. So countries that are playing into this by supplying Russia, they are fueling a threat to Europe more broadly, not just Ukraine. And they have to take that into account, particularly in their own relationships with Europe.
As you would expect, Tony and I have discussed Ukraine now since taking office nearly every other week. We had a fruitful discussion today. It's hugely important. I said in my opening that this was a critical moment. It's hugely important that we're traveling together to hear from our Ukrainian counterparts and President Zelensky their assessment of the situation on the ground and their needs on the ground. It would, however, be quite wrong to comment on the detail of operational issues in a forum such as this, because the only person who could benefit is Putin. And we will do nothing to give him any advantage in his illegal invasion. On the transfer of ballistic missiles from Iran, this is a troubling pattern that we're seeing from Iran. It is definitely a significant escalation, and we are coordinating action, and we'll have more to say on that very shortly.
Thank you. Patrick Wintour, The Guardian.
Thank you very much. Secretary of State, the Israeli Defense Minister Gallant this week warned that Israel had reached a strategic junction in its war with Hamas, where it must choose between the risk of a broader escalation and a hostage deal with Hamas. Do you agree with that assessment? And secondly, is it not really the case that these ceasefire talks are at a deadlock? And could you in any way give any assurances to Benjamin Netanyahu about the Philadelphia corridor and that there is no need for Israeli forces to be there? Israel's security will be preserved. And Foreign Secretary, you were in the UAE last week. The UAE is one of the few countries that has said it's willing to put troops into Gaza as a peacekeeping force. Would you welcome that, and would you like to see other Arab states make the same offer?
On the ceasefire, here's what I can tell you. More than 90% of the issues have been agreed, decided. So we're down to a handful of issues, not even a handful of issues, that are hard but fully resolvable in our judgment. And as we've said before, when you get down to the last 10%, the last 10 meters, those are almost by definition the hardest ground to cover. But we believe that these are fully resolvable. Right now, we're working intensely with our Egyptian and Qatari counterparts to work together to bridge any remaining gaps. And in the coming time, very soon, we'll put that before the parties, and we'll see what they say. I think what is evident, though, is the strong interest that everyone in the region has in being able to get the ceasefire concluded. It's clearly in Israel's interest. It's in its interest to get hostages home. It's in its interest to turn down the temperature in Gaza. It's in its interest to have possible off-ramps in the north with Hezbollah and Lebanon that a ceasefire in Gaza would make more possible. It's in its interest to also further enable us to calm the situation in the Red Sea with the Houthis. And it's in its interest because it opens other prospects that could fundamentally alter Israel's security for the long term, including the prospect of normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. We saw back on April 13th, when Israel was attacked directly by Iran for the first time, something unprecedented, and that was other countries coming to its active defense. And this showed in embryonic form what the future could be, a future in which Israel is integrated into the region, in which it enjoys normal relations with other countries, something it sought from day one of its existence, in which it's protected against the aggression coming from Iran or its proxies, and in which Iran and those proxies are isolated. That's very much possible in the future. But it requires resolving Gaza, ending the conflict there. It requires, as David said, a credible pathway for the Palestinians to a state of their own. And these are very hard issues. But that future is very powerful and very positive. The alternative is a perpetuation of conflict, a perpetuation of insecurity, and multiple fronts at the same time, not only in Gaza, but we see what's happening in the West Bank and growing insecurity there. We see what's happening in the north and the possibility of conflict with Hezbollah and even broader conflict with Iran. From day one, our purpose has been not only to make sure that Israel can effectively ensure that October 7th never happens again, but also that the conflict doesn't spread. And we're intent on that. But the longer all of this goes on, the greater the risks of just that happening. So I think for Israel, clearly for the Palestinian people, and especially Palestinians in Gaza, who desperately need this conflict to be over so that they can get the help that they need and begin to rebuild their lives. For every country in the region, the interest is clear. I can't speak to what's in the mind of Mr. Sinwar and where his interests lie. He will have to make those judgments for himself. But we remain resolute in working to bring the ceasefire over the line because it would open up so many more positive prospects. And let's see where we are in the coming days.
Could I just say, Patrick, that Tony's assessment that 90% of the deal is there is completely correct. And in the end, what you need are partners for peace. And that is now in the hands of Bibi Netanyahu and Sinwar to get us over the line and to take that deal that is on the table. And we've now been talking about that deal for weeks. It was important to go to the UAE, as it's important to speak to Arab partners across the region. And the focus of your question is on the day after. And clearly, it's on the security guarantees that are important for Israel to have. And Arab partners, and certainly the UAE, are showing some forward-leaning in their commitment to securing that. But what I think is absolutely essential, and they all say this, is that there has to be a pathway to two states. That has to be present, or they cannot give that commitment. And then there's also discussion of both the security in Gaza and the administration. And clearly we have to see a reformed and renewed Palestinian Authority, and there can be no role for Hamas going forward. So we're very focused on the day after, but let's remember that when we talk about the deal, it is a phased deal. Let us get over the line to get to that first phase, and let us see that pathway to security on both sides.
And Shane Tandon from AFP.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Foreign Secretary. Secretary Blinken, could I ask you about a couple of aspects of the Middle East? The Israel Defense Forces just a moment ago released an investigation, or released some preliminary findings into the death of an American citizen, Ms. Eisenor Enyegi. Could you say, they said that she was killed most likely by Israeli fire, but unintentionally. Are you confident with that assessment? Does the United States want to see anything further? Are you confident with the assessment that this was unintentional? And what more do you want Israel to do? Could there be repercussions? For both of you, could I ask you about the International Criminal Court? It seems that in the coming days there could be a formal decision on whether to seek an arrest warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu, among others. Mr. Foreign Secretary, the Labour government, of course, has taken a slightly different stance from your predecessors, from the Conservatives on this. Could you say what your position is, whether you support going ahead, and is there unity between the two allies on this? Thank you.
Sean, thank you very much. With regard to the tragic killing of Eisenor, I think what we saw of this investigation is it seems to show what eyewitnesses have said and made clear, that her killing was both unprovoked and unjustified. No one should be shot and killed for attending a protest. No one should have to put their life at risk just for freely expressing their views. In our judgment, Israeli security forces need to make some fundamental changes in the way that they operate in the West Bank, including changes to their rules of engagement. We've long seen reports of the security forces looking the other way when extremist settlers use violence against Palestinians. We've seen reports of excessive force by Israeli security forces against Palestinians. And now we have the second American citizen killed at the hands of Israeli security forces. It's not acceptable. It has to change. And we'll be making that clear to the senior-most members of the Israeli government. Now, we're looking carefully at the results of this investigation, but even on an initial read, and even accepting it at face value, it's clear that there are serious issues that need to be dealt with, and we will insist that they be dealt with.
I think the important thing to stress in great democracies such as ours is our belief in the separation of powers. There is an important forum for lawyers and the judiciary and our courts, and then there is also an important forum for politicians and those who represent the people. We've always been clear in the UK in our belief in the international rule of law, the rules-based order, and in IHL issues which are fundamentally important. And we took a decision last week in relation to arms exports that were quasi-legal on the basis of our law as they stand. We believe in international law, we believe in the Statute of Rome, but these must be decisions for the international courts to determine. I don't want to comment on the assessment that they will reach. I qualified as a lawyer in part because of the great Harvard Law School, but I'm going to leave it to the lawyers to determine these very complex matters.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.